Hi everyone, my name is Hannah and today I'm going to be giving like a super brief summary about medieval dances and what they are. I'm going to give a little bit of a history of them. I chose this topic because I think that this time and period in history is just really super interesting. It was a time of kings and queens and castles, so I thought it might be a little interesting to explore some of the dance that they had. All right, so starting really briefly with a brief summary of history of medieval dance. Obviously, when we talk about medieval, we're talking about the Middle Ages. And during this time, dance was an extremely reserved practice. Um, for a lot of this time period, it really wasn't something that was just known and accepted throughout society. It was done in the private of people's homes. And as I'm sure you know, the church during this time also played an extremely important role in people's everyday lives. Therefore, it played an extremely important role in the development of medieval dances, even though, at first they did not actually approve of them. Eventually, dance was accepted and it played a large role in religious ceremonies and sermons. And also, all of these dances you will see from England, France, Germany, Italy, you will see that they showcase like a variety of rich culture that was developing in Europe at this time. All right, so medieval dance moves. So although all of these dances are extremely different, they also share a lot of moves in common. There were single steps where the dancer would start with their left foot and then they would take one step forward and bring the right to meet the left. Then there was something that was called a single back step, which starts with the right foot and then you take one step back and then you take the left foot back to meet the right. Those are two of the most simple. You would pretty much find those in almost every single type of dance. Then we get to the more complicated dance steps. One of them is known as the Brantel steps, where the dancer steps in like a specific direction and they would bring the other foot together. Um, and then one thing important to note that at this time, all dances, no matter what social class you're a part of, had bows and curtsies. It was just a part of their custom at the time. All right, so medieval dance music. So obviously at this time, they didn't have huge stereo systems like we have today and big, huge theaters that had, a lot of surround sound, but they did try and include as much music as possible. In the beginning parts of the Middle Ages, you would often see them just using their voices. They would sing a lot, or they would use, um, instruments that were made out of, wood and things like that. Um, but then later on, as they started developing more and more, and they had more innovation and invention, they started using things such as jingles, bells, kettle drums, which is actually right here, and tambourines, which is actually right up here. You will see in a lot of dances, actually, they will use these tambourines as props where the dancers would actually play them while dancing, which is super interesting because they were actually very heavy because the outside was made out of wood. Medieval dance costumes. This one is super interesting. I think, obviously, the clothes that they would wear would depend on the social class that they were in at the time. Um, Obviously, at the very top, we had the kings and the queens, and then at the very bottom, we would have the noblemen and women, and then from the bottom of that, we would have kind of the town folk, and then at the bottom of that, we would have the peasants, the servants. Um, so again, their costumes would depend on the social class that they were in. The upper class women would wear these huge, extravagant dresses that were made out of extremely expensive materials, most of the time silk. And they were very brightly colored as well to draw attention. All of them, no matter social class, would wear corsets and petticoats underneath their gowns that would give them that perfectly rounded shape. It was very flattering at the time. And also, women in the upper class would wear big, huge headdresses. A lot of them had really big feathers. Um, that would also be, kind of an attention grabber for them. Peasant women kind of wore their everyday clothes. They didn't really have money to buy any of these expensive things, and so they would just wear what they had. Medieval men, obviously the upper class, they wore extremely bold colored tunics. They were sometimes very shiny and had some interesting patterns on them. Um, Occasionally, depending on the dance, they would carry swords at their right side. They'd be used as props. Sometimes, not all the time, but it was known to happen. And like peasant women, the men wore their everyday work clothes. So here we have some examples of what these might look like. As you can see, this is more upper class, what the costumes would look like, but you can see that there were just these huge costumes that they would wear with such intricate designs. Sometimes there would be so many layers that the woman would have to go outside and fan themselves off and take a break from the dancing because they would get so hot underneath. But yeah, those are fewer examples. Those are some of the prettier ones that I found. All right, so now we go into the actual dancing of medieval times. So there were two main types of dancing at this time. One was called the court dance, one was called the country dance. Think of the court dances as dances for the upper class. These were the ones that were danced by the kings and the queens and the noblemen at the time, always in their court setting, which would be in the, in their castle. They were sometimes referred to as society dances. You might see them written like that at times. Three of the most common ones, or more important ones, were known as the Basset dance, the Pavane, and the Morris dance. And we'll see some of those a little bit later on. And then we have country dance, which obviously, as you can probably tell, is considered the dance for the normal people. These would be the dances that you would see people performing in streets and in town centers, and there would just be a bunch of people gathered in festivals, and they would just be dancing around for fun. Three of the most common ones are the egg dance, the farandole, and the quadrille. All right, so the first one, the Basset dance. So this is considered the best documented dance of the 15th century. It is a court dance, so it was performed, or it was danced by the upper class. It actually originated in France, and in French, Basset dance is translated as low dance. It was especially popular in the Burgundian court. The choreography for this dance was actually quite slow. It wasn't very upbeat. It was just meant to get people, together and out on the dance floor. It wasn't very complicated, at least not as complicated as the other ones that we will see. The Pavane. So this one's a little bit more complicated than the Basset dance, but it is a dance, but it has more of a purpose behind it rather than just dancing and having fun. And that is because it was actually a very, very slow processional dance that was used to carry couples, so a man and a woman together, up to the front of the court room to present themselves to the queen, who was considered, the hostess of all parties held at the castle. You will see this in a lot of movies, actually, that I've found, and it was extremely popular in Queen Elizabeth's court in England during the 16th century. Again, this one doesn't have as many, steps to it because the point was really to go and present yourself to the queen. But it was kind of a fun way of doing that. And the Morris dance. So this one is extremely interesting. It is a form of English folk dance, and it was always accompanied by music no matter what. In some of the pictures that you might see, you would probably see the dancers, the male dancers, carrying big kettle drums around and playing those while they're dancing. The dancers were usually wearing these bell pads that you can kind of see right here on their shins, which is super interesting because they were a little bit difficult to move in. But this one was a super upbeat and lively dance that was performed. A lot of people that were it was meant to have fun. That was the purpose of it. It was just a type of celebration for the people. The egg dance. So this one is extremely interesting. Obviously, the egg dance, it's in the title itself. But basically, this was a game that was performed around Easter time, in which multiple eggs would be laid on the ground. And the goal was for the individuals who were dancing to dance among them, damaging as few as possible. It didn't really have any specific choreographed steps. The only point really was to not break or crack the eggs. And I'm sure, as you can see in some of the pictures right here, this woman's even blindfolded, which is super interesting. And she was just trying to, as elegantly as possible, move around the dance floor. Historians think nowadays that it became a symbol of rebirth of man at Easter, simply because it has the egg, and a lot of times, even today in our traditional Easter celebrations, we still use eggs kind of as like a new birth. So that's what they believe it symbolized, but honestly it was probably maybe just a bunch of people, having fun and finding creative and alternative ways to dance. All right, so the Farandole. This one, not a lot is known about it, except for that it was considered an open chain community dance in Provence, France. Now, open chain community dance means that a bunch of people would come into the street and they would just start, interlocking hands and they'd begin dancing. This was an extremely upbeat dance. It was done, what we think, at a lot of festivals, and again, it is super not very formal. They just went out and they would have a lot of fun doing it. You can see some pictures right here, like in this bottom one, I think it's like a town square, and then up here, this one's like in front of a church. So this is where just a lot of the local people would come together during their festivals and just, have a lot of fun dancing together. So the quadrille. This one is actually an English style dance, and you'll see a lot of reenactments of it today. It became super popular all over Europe as the Renaissance period progressed. It is danced by two or sometimes more couples who would place themselves in a square. You probably saw that in a lot of movies. You really wouldn't get more than or over three couples or six individual people, because then that would be a lot, and then they would start bumping into each other. What's interesting about this one is that this dance came into being a rebellion to simple inclusive dance forms which were prevailing at the time. So based off of that, we can assume that this dance was extremely intricate. It had a lot of steps that were very difficult to maneuver, and if you knew this dance, then you were probably very well off, because you could afford a dance master to come in and teach it to you. So that's one interesting thing about this one. Again, it would always be a couple, like of two people, versus in the other dances we would see, it wouldn't necessarily have to be. But this one you always had to dance with two people in it. So you can see here some of the, this one's probably just like a normal party held in a town, a little more upper class than in the town center. And then you can see down here is just a reenactment of it. And you can see those women with those huge dresses. All right, so that is it. I hope you enjoyed it, and thank you so much for watching.